Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It is a real pleasure for me to be here and to speak about the E-Waste Challenge MOOC, a massive open online course that was just launched last week. As mentioned by Dan, I work in the Secretariat in the Technical Assistance branch, and I coordinate the online training program. I want to tell you a bit more, very briefly, about the MOOC. The MOOC was developed in partnership by the European Union Institute of Innovation and Technology Climate KIC, the Climate Innovation and Community of the European Union. It's the major partnership on climate change of the European Union, the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, with contributions from the World Resources Forum, and it is developed also by KU Leuven, a university based in Belgium. Who is the MOOC for? The course has many components, and it has been developed for a wide audience because waste is a cross-cutting issue and a transdisciplinary issue also. The participants will find resources and will find opportunities for discussion in the forums. So the MOOC is designed to be accessible to all, but also provides enough depth and further resources for anyone who wishes to go deeper into the subject. The target audience is e-waste recycling managers, or urban planners, graduate students in both international policies and in the recycling sector, so engineering and recycling operators. The MOOC is a course for PhD students at KU Leuven, and it is worth 2 ECTs in the credits in the European system. So it was launched on the 4th of April, and there are about 30-40 hours of learning provided in short lessons and 5 modules. The lessons are included in 5 modules. For each short lesson, there is a forum where the participants and learners can exchange ideas and also ask questions. There is a moderator that is there available to post and answer questions. There are also this webinar is part of a series of live and interactive online sessions on the various subjects of the MOOC, and we have this series until the 2nd of June. In the lesson of today is in fact reflected in the module 1 of the MOOC. People using the MOOC can complete at their own time, and they can also follow a long pathway till the certificate or a short pathway. Learning is activity-based, and all the modules support the main challenge, which is called Canvas within the MOOC, and it is a project that needs to be submitted to obtain the certificate. So the MOOC is on the Climate KIC learning platform, and the course is as mentioned, designed in 5 modules and easy to download if the learners are in developing countries. Each module represents 6-8 hours of learning time, and the modules help the learner to put the information in the context of the profession or the country or the situation in which a learner is living or working. For example, there are good practices, there are opportunities to find out how international environmental agreements are guiding the transboundary movement of e-waste and the environmentally sound management, the recycling and the recovery of valuable materials. The 5 modules start with a scoping of the problem with the e-waste tsunami module. And then they help the learner to look at what is inside the waste and what are the health and environment impacts. A specific lesson looks at the climate impacts of e-waste management. And then there is a collection of good practices for e-waste management and also good practices for extracting valuable materials and considerations related to building businesses out of dismantling and sound recycling of e-waste. There is a module on incentives, opportunities, and various policies, tools that are used around the world to regulate e-waste. And then there is a last module where lots of materials for advocating for the environmentally sound management of e-waste is included. As I briefly mentioned before, the prize is the certificate, and to obtain it, it is necessary to develop a project, a canvas. And this could be an improvement, an innovation, a campaign, a community initiative, a research project, or a business idea. It should have the potential to have a positive impact on environment and health and to help to prevent and mitigate climate change. Each module of the MOOC supports the participants in thinking and arriving to the idea and to develop it for completing the challenge. In the learning platform, you will find also an opportunity to discuss with other learners and to pose questions and to participate in a wider community of learners which are taking a MOOC at the same time. So join us on the MOOC and help us to advocate solutions to the challenge of e-waste management. And here you will see the logo of all the partners who developed the MOOC. And I would like to add that a new partner just joined is the EIT Raw Materials KIC, a new partnership for the extraction and the sound management of raw materials in the European Union. And with this, I conclude my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, and good welcome to all of you attending this session. In this session, I will give you indeed a good idea on UNU's efforts on providing better statistics for e-waste on a global scale. But I also tell a little bit the story behind what happened over time, and we'll get you also some additional materials and insights on also what the importance is of having better statistics on e-waste in many different domains in the e-waste development process. So what I will do is also focus on that, show a little bit indeed also on the PROSM project, which is also quantifying the materials in e-waste, as well as some lessons towards policy development. And as I understood that there are quite a number of Latin American persons available as well. There are a few slides in the slide deck also specifically on that continent. let me also introduce myself and my organization a little bit. First of all, United Nations University. It is a bit of a misleading term. We are not a traditional university, but we are a UN institute and a UN think tank. So we are doing a lot of research related to different domains, specifically related also to sustainability, security, and related aspects. And we basically act as a think tank for the UN organization, but we are not a classical university in the sense that we have a student program or PhD students. Here we are much more a kind of inter-exchange between different universities and also promoting better academic networks around the globe. So we do have PhD students walking around, as well as interns and master students, but that usually is in cooperation in different projects with different universities around the globe. Our small team is dedicated to sustain myself personally, I have been starting my PhD in 1999, and at that stage it took me like half a year to find 2 other PhDs. I think at the moment, if you look at different universities, there must be like 2 PhD students per university. Some of the advice and some of the projects we have been doing contain a lot of e-waste quantification efforts. In many cases built in a larger project, like in 2006 and 2007, when we provided the first rather comprehensive review of the European rules, which is, let's say, also an important template for the design of legislation in many other continents in the world, with only countries like Japan and Switzerland preceding the European Union here. But also recently we provided a new study on the collection rates of WEEE and also establishing a common methodology for the Commission to look at a different way of measuring collection targets in the recast directive in Europe. And also at the end of 2015 a report on e-waste in Latin America was released. The Global E-Waste Monitor I will talk about a lot in the next slides. But this quantification work is also the basis for studies on the flows of e-waste, like for Europe in a project called QUIT, Countering WEEE Illegal Trade, which is recently completed and also was present in the news and online quite a bit. A very interesting study doing not just the market analysis, but also legal analysis, crime analysis, and a lot of recommendations to improve the situation. Primarily in Europe, but also focusing, of course, on the exports to emerging countries. PROSM we're going to talk about later, but besides all these studies, our team is also having 2 other large pillars. We do quite a bit of capacity building and training ourselves in the form of e-waste academies. And we are also facilitating a lot of international dialogue, where together with a lot of other UN organizations, producers, recyclers, and a large academic network, we are hosting the Solving the E-Waste initiative platform here. The basic reasons why, and I'm also happy that the MOOC is starting to have this presentation very early, is I think it's very important to have good facts and figures on the e-waste situation. And as such, some of the questions we are asking ourselves after all those years of research are very often pretty basic. We're looking at what is e-waste, how much e-waste is out there, where does it go, what is in it, and of course what are the impacts. And this information, and specifically if you look back also, for instance, in the European situation, was lacking quite a bit in the early stages of the development of legislation. And it also made it hard to make legislation, as well as the implementation of it, successfully targeted to the right interventions and the right recommendations. So to understand the amounts and the trends is absolutely crucial for having a good and proper environmental, economic and social understanding of what the e-waste challenge is about. Without it, it is really difficult to develop policies and to the right amount of planning, technology development and all the implementation measures that are needed to have a much better e-waste situation in many countries in the world. So in very simple words, the work we're doing is really groundwork to improve information, to improve also the funding and the financing of implementation measures in order to have good policies. So basically, it should allow that we have much better information, better targeted funding and economics, and good data to build upon in the future. To continue also with the very basic question, what is e-waste? Well, we have different thoughts about this in the world. Different legislations have different scopes. That's not a surprise for you, most likely. But it's very hard to model e-waste amounts under these varying scopes and varying definitions. If you look also at the STEP initiative website, there are some further documents explaining and giving you e-waste definitions. But also for the research, it's quite important that you classify. We are counting at the moment about 650 product types, and in Europe they're classified either in 10 or in 6 categories. And of course, it's very hard to bring this all together. So for making a good measurement framework, we developed something which is called the U and U keys. We clustered all the different types of e-waste in 54 categories, which have very similar average weights, are applied in a similar way, and have similar technical characteristics as well. And this is needed for modeling and quantification purposes to align the different data sources that may be out there. For instance, from individual producer registers on the left-hand side, or in the international trade statistics on the top part in the bottom diagram, and other reporting mechanisms to each other. So we did not invent a new classification type, but just we made the entire academic analysis really feasible and also done in a well-structured and well-scoped manner. Later on, at the end, I will also provide you some academic reference to further read about this. The approach we are using here is with these 54 U and U keys. We are modeling the sales, the stocks, the lifespan, and ultimately the e-waste generation in either rather simple methodologies or with rather sophisticated methodologies. So in all this, we have been also analyzing the international trade statistics, and with a lot of internal data and a lot of experiences in different countries, we came up with a framework to build this global e-waste monitor. I will not spend too much time on the methodology. I am an academic, I can talk for hours on this. But very simply summarized, in this sheet you see what is happening. We're taking the Comtrade database, and there are a couple of hundred good codes related to e-waste. We have analyzed all those good codes individually to be sure that there's indeed e-waste in there. And sometimes that's hard because the good codes are not designed to classify e-waste. They are designed for our international trade system in a way. That also means that in some cases there are parts in there, or there is also non-we in certain good codes. We then take a very simple approach in summarizing the data and using the import per country minus export as the actual sales and the starting point for domestic e-waste generation. I have to stress that point domestic here. What we are doing in this e-waste monitor is really focusing on equipment that is being reported, that is basically reported in the trade statistics. It does not contain data on illegal exports or exports under other good codes where e-waste may be hidden. And I'll come back to that issue again later. With this data set linked to those 54 categories, we apply a rather large statistical correction routine because there's a lot of outliers, sometimes errors, missing data, and we also do cross comparisons with other countries that are in similar conditions to check for for strange data points in order to come to consolidated and adjusted data. This data is then combined with the distribution curves we have from different regions and different countries in the world for different equipment. There's a lot of detailed analysis behind. And then in the end, it is leading to a quantification of the amounts of e-waste generated per country, per year, and per product. So far, the methodology, I can imagine that you have questions on this, but there's no time for that. But you can always chase us on what's really behind here. Let's have a look at some of the results. Our analysis for 2014 is about 42 million tons of e-waste being generated. If we look at that, and also in relation here, only 4 billion are in some way covered by national legislation. So there is a lot of territory in the world where a lot of the population is not covered by any e-waste legislation. If you look at the e-waste type, when we cluster and simplify it, it starts with some small amounts of lamps, small amounts but high in mercury potentially. There's a lot of energy saving lamps in this category. We then have 3 million tons of small IT equipment. That is the category where the general public usually thinks about when we're talking about e-waste. It's the computers and mobile phones. A very rich section of the urban mine in a way. There's a lot of precious metals and other, the entire periodic system is in there. Then we have 6 million tons of screens. This is both the CRT, the cathode ray tube ones, as the newer LCD screens. 7 million tons of what we call in Europe temperature exchange equipment, in simple terms fridges. Very often for a significant percentage still containing CFCs, with quite a high ozone layer depletion but also global warming potential. 12 million tons of large equipment like washing machines, and 30 million tons of small equipment. And this category is also growing at the fastest pace of all the categories here. If we look at the countries where this is being generated, no surprise, the US and China are the biggest domestic e-waste generators in the world, followed by Japan, Germany, but then surprisingly some of the emerging economies as well as European countries are appearing. India is here, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, and a few other countries are like Turkey. They are high on this list as well. And specifically here in these areas, not just China and India, but also Brazil, Russia, Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, they have quite an impressive growth rate, as also their middle class is growing at a rapid pace. So this future diagram of e-waste will also change very quickly over time. If we look at the kilos per inhabitant, no surprise, it's Japan, Europe, the Americas and Australia that are the, let's say, the biggest consumer per capita, being followed by Latin America and Asia, and then Africa. If we look at the official collection numbers, at least the numbers we were able to find being published somewhere, this is only 6.5 million tons. So the 42 million tons, we are basically only getting 1/6 of the total discard volume collected in the official channels. That is quite a concern, and we'll talk about that later as well. So the collection percentages are, to no surprise, they are not very high. They are about 35 to 40% in Europe, and so there's quite some room for improvement. So an important lesson out of this is the e-waste problem is not just a problem for emerging economies, it still is also a collection problem still in a lot of the developed world, even in countries that have e-waste legislation for many years. So let's move on to the next simple question: what happens with e-waste? There are a few scenarios. I will do this rather quickly. Again, mainly in developed countries, go into official collection channels like commercial pickup, bring it to container parks and retail collection, and then very often over producer compliance schemes moving to the right recyclers. But there's also some leakages. E-waste in the waste bin, small appliances, small IT appliances and lamps have quite a habit of going in the developed world into the waste bin, ending up with other residual solid waste. Collection outside the official schemes is also happening, of course, in this. The collection volumes basically being 1/3 in the developed world, it doesn't mean that the other 2/3 are being exported illegally. We'll take a look at that later. But there's a lot of non-compliant or non-reported collection and also scavenging of components of e-waste taking place in the developed world. And the last scenario is, of course, in emerging economies. In many cases, the collection, the informal collection is rather efficient, but is not going to controlled channels, but rather into scavenging and local small recyclers, and sometimes in waste dumps. If you look at what's happening for Europe, I will give you some numbers. I will do it quickly again, but you can read about this also in the slide deck later. This has been published also. In Europe, we are basically collecting 1/3 of the e-waste. That is also what is available in the Eurostat websites in Brussels. In our project called Countering the Illegal Trade, involving also Interpol and the WeForum and a few other partners, we were able to document another 2.2 million tons is being processed basically with other metal scrap. So think about a lot of large household appliances, metal-dominated products, still going, for instance, for car shredder or other metal scrap recycling facilities. About 750,000 tons are going in the waste bin. Here there's a lot of environmental value and resource value at stake. And that basically means that the statistics for Europe end here with 3.2 million tons being not documented, lacking any statistics. However, we have been estimating also what is happening with this amount. And the numbers are less certain on what you see on top. But we basically estimate that slightly over half of this is also processed within the EU, and that around 1.5 million tons is exported from the EU to Africa, but also to Eastern Europe and to Asia. If we look at the numbers here, we think there's another 1 million tons of this 1.7 in non-compliant processing, and another 750,000 tons in scavenged and stolen parts, but it's, for instance, cable, compressors, drives and memory from IT equipment that is taking out for the value. So this is material that is not lost, It is just because of their value being cherry-picked and not reported to the official channels. In some cases, there are significant environmental issues with this. This middle small picture about the compressors, we are estimating this to be about 80,000 tons a year. That is equivalent to 5 million vehicles on the road and their CO2 emissions on an annual basis. It's because the CFC pressure from these compressors is lost and directly emitted to the air. So here it's also something that requires better inspections and also much more upstream inspections rather than only what's shipped out from Europe. If you look at the other amounts being exported from the EU, there's a lot of research available, but it's hard to get solid numbers on this. We found about 200,000 tons being documented as being exported. 900,000 tons we think is functioning or has some reuse value, and 30% is waste. What we see in our analysis, it's an important lesson that is not landed in many places and nor at the general public, is that we did not see any driver for direct waste dumping of e-waste to emerging or developing countries. The logistics, the economics do not make sense. It is primarily the reuse driver and avoiding proper sorting and testing and packaging of equipment when shipped out that is lacking. So this is an important lesson, but very often with such shipments there is quite a bit of e-waste or products that are very near their end of life stage traveling with it, still contributing quite a bit to an e-waste challenge in developing countries. The urban mine, with all this number crunching, we are also able to some extent to determine what's in there, and specifically on this area where e-waste is quite complex in both having value and having hazardous substances in it. There's another project in Europe in development which is worthwhile to take a look at. That in a few minutes. This e-waste monitor attracted quite a lot of press. You can read about it later. And we also have some plans, of course, with this work. As you can imagine, our e-waste quantification work is sometimes standalone and sometimes supporting very specific projects. And this will continue. So in 2016, a further data gathering exercise with the UN Statistical Division will take place, and also with other international organizations. We will try to improve the framework for the statistics and also the data gathering of how much e-waste is being collected. As a result of those efforts, there's a methodology report in the slide deck later as well. But e-waste is mentioned also twice now in the current version of the Sustainable Development Indicators in two specific targets. And I think that's quite a good achievement, and I hope a lot of other international organizations, including the Basel Secretariat, will support us in keeping such indicators in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now to the urban mine and the PROSUM project. It is nice to have a lot of data on the fate of products, both in Europe as well as worldwide. But it is also interesting to take a look at what is the role of e-waste as a potential and future resource. What's the role of e-waste in this urban mine? We developed over a few years this project with some of the best institutes in Europe, including also a lot of the European geological surveys. And basically we wanted to construct an EU knowledge base on this topic of secondary raw materials, and to make that secondary raw materials part also embedded in the EU geological data infrastructure. So basically a place where both primary and secondary raw material portals in the EU can merge and can be related to each other. To do this, we are working on the stocks and flows as you knew, as you can see on the top right part. But our colleagues are also working on product characterization, what is exactly in new and old products, and characterization of waste streams, and also there's quite an information network available. If you are interested and want to be informed on this topic, you can click on the project website and go to the information network, and you can assign yourself to get more information in the form of newsletters and other materials. Here's just a kind of a sneak preview of what we were able to do for 4 elements at this point in time for Europe. We have looked at the presence of copper, but also gold, silver, and palladium in e-waste. These 3 precious metals are on the left-hand axis. The copper is on the right-hand axis in a factor 1000 in kilotons. And as you can see, that specifically screens and small equipment and small IT equipment are high in gold, where a lot of the copper can be found in small equipment in the form of cable, and also in the form of motors and other cable in fridges and large equipment as well. And what we're basically trying to do here is to do real prospecting. There's a lot of talk in Europe about the circular economy and improving recycling. That's all great, should also be implemented as far as we can. But in order to get these materials out, you really have to know where it is, in what amounts, and also what the trends are over time. And this is exactly what is being dealt with in this PROSOM project. What we'll do, I will skip this for the time being, but an outlook of this is we are consistently having an evolution of our e-waste quantification work, and we are moving from these products to the materials. And we also would like to move into some related waste sectors. That's why also batteries, end-of-life vehicles, and mining waste is included in this PROSOM project. And of course, we are investigating to expand the scope here to other continents as well. Here's some information and links for our Latin American participants. We have done a relatively short and similar study with our data also for Latin America in 2014. And maybe not to your surprise, but Brazil and Mexico are, of course, the countries with the highest domestic e-waste generation. In this report, there's a lot more information available for you if you are interested. I'm showing this also because the Latin America region shows, like the Asian region as well as Africa, that there is in some cases quite a high growth rate. And the growth rate in these regions are definitely much higher than in, for instance, Europe or the US. And that also means that the topic of e-waste will change quite a bit in its focus and where it's being generated for the coming years. So some conclusions before I give you some more information and look up information, and before we can go into questions and answering. I think the UNU work on this, with a lot of support from other partners and from the STEP initiative and many past projects, is basically an unprecedented level of detailed knowledge on the world of e-waste. We have these information you saw before also available, broken down in 54 categories, of course. This is not published. And you can contact us if you are looking for specific data for your country or for a specific type of equipment, for instance. There's about 42 million tons of e-waste generated in 2014. This is growing with a significant percentage, and specifically the small appliances are growing rapidly. Of this amount, we are basically only covering 1/6 in official collection channels, and quite some of this is not recycled properly or going to undesired destinations. This world of e-waste is changing very fast. The products as such change quite a bit. If you look back, for instance, 15 years ago and ask consumers who wanted to have a cell phone, many people didn't see the need. Now it's one of the most rapidly growing e-waste flows and basically present in extremely high amounts in every continent and every country in the world. Also, with regard to the general public, there is not a direct driver behind e-waste dumping in developing countries. The main economic driver is e-waste exports because of their reuse value. I think this also means, maybe to trigger some of the discussion now as well, is that we also have to start looking at ensuring that if we think about the concept of circular economy, that also the developing countries are included in that loop. What I mean is that specifically for very valuable materials, complex elements and hazardous materials, we should be able in the coming years to have a really good collection of those and sending them to the right facilities available around the globe. I think that is the single biggest challenge for the coming years in this e-waste domain from a global perspective. Another big thing to still work on, and maybe I'm a bit frustrated on this, seeing development being very slowly, is that still in the developed world there is a continued lack of control over treatment, and very often countries cannot specify nor they can be transparent on the amount of depollution and toxic control they are realizing in their own countries. That is also an area where I think it should really improve quite a bit. In very short words, as also one of my PhD students used for his PhD thesis, we have to collect more and treat better. And with those 4 simple words, I'm almost at the end. I would like to thank you for your attention. In the slide deck available, there's quite a number of links, and I also added some specific slides on the Global E-Waste Monitor, on the E-Waste Statistics Guidelines, on the Countering the Illegal Trade Report, E-Waste in Latin America, this new study for the European Commission, and our E-Waste academies and other capacity building things we are doing. You can slowly read that if you're interested in having the time. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll give the speaking back to the moderators. Thank you very much.